So I guess it's important for people to know that not every bat in our area gets tested. There are some scenarios that come up over the course of a season where, because a bat came into contact with people and the bat's available for testing, that bat does go on to get tested. This particular bat that was mentioned in our release is the first time this season that we had a bat that we tested where it came back positive for rabies. So that means for that bat, we know it was carrying rabies. Now, as I mentioned again, there are lots of bats that don't get tested. And we know, even just from background data, that bats as a species or as a population have a very high likelihood of carrying rabies. They are actually a serious sort of animal of concern when it comes to rabies risk. When I was younger, I used to think of rabies that was as being an issue for dogs or raccoons or things like that. But if you look at the actual data, bats are the key risk when it comes to rabies. You really don't want to come into contact with bats because there's a good chance that any given bat you see could be carrying rabies. And so we want to use this occasion to remind people that bats are a high-risk species or a high-risk population for carrying rabies. And, it's something you don't want to come into contact with if you can avoid. First off, in terms of prevention, I mean, for most people, what that's going to mean is just keeping your distance. These are wild animals. Don't try and get into scenarios where you are in close contact. Some people, if they're, certain animal workers or the spelunkers or things like that, they can access a vaccine that gives them some protection. But for most people, that's not needed. Rabies is a virus. If you have a bat, bite you or lick you or have its saliva come in contact with, broken skin or things like that in your body, the virus can get in and it can slowly over time make its way along your nerves all the way up to your brain. And unfortunately, once it gets into your brain and spinal cord, that's when it is essentially a fatal illness. The idea is if you had an exposure, the vaccine and a medication called immunoglobulin, if they're given at that point, they can help to interrupt that process and keep you from having that infection that might have otherwise occurred. So if there is an exposure, contact us. We can walk you through it. If there is, as a consequence of that exposure, a bite mark or a wound that is a particular area that's been exposed, one thing you can do is, flush it out with water, run it underwater, 30 minutes, get water in there to flush out any bat saliva or anything else. That can be a good, helpful thing to do. And obviously, if you have a bite or a wound, seek appropriate medical care for that. One thing that people often do is they'll go to their hospital emergency department to get their wound checked, and that can also be a good place to start the rabies medications or vaccines if they're recommended.